There is a glacier in Antarctica the size of Florida. Scientists call it the Doomsday Glacier. That name is not dramatic. It is accurate. If that one glacier goes, it pulls the rest of West Antarctica with it. And when that happens, every coastal city on Earth, Miami, Mumbai, Shanghai, Amsterdam, goes underwater. Not in 1,000 years, in your lifetime or your children's. But here's what nobody is telling you about Antarctica. The ice is the least interesting part. What's underneath it? The lakes, the rivers, the volcanoes, the life forms, the buried mountain ranges, and the resources that have the world's most powerful nations quietly repositioning their military and scientific assets. That's the story that actually matters. And once you understand what's down there, you'll never look at a weather map, a coastal city, or a news headline about China the same way again. Let's start with something that broke open the entire field of Antarctic science and barely made international news when it happened. In March 2022, a weather station near the center of East Antarctica recorded temperatures 40 degrees Celsius above the seasonal average. Not 4 degrees, not 10 degrees, 40. Scientists described it as the most anomalous temperature event ever recorded anywhere on Earth in recorded history. For comparison, if the same thing happened over the Sahara Desert, the Sahara would have been frozen solid. Antarctica's interior hit temperatures that should have been impossible given everything we thought we understood about the continent's climate system. The models didn't predict it. Nobody fully understands why it happened. And nobody is talking about it nearly enough. That event matters because it tells us the ice sheet is more sensitive to disruption than we thought. And the ice sheet is not just a block of frozen water sitting quietly at the bottom of the world. It is an active, living system that is connected to everything. Here's what I mean. Antarctica holds approximately 5 million cubic kilometers of ice. That number is almost impossible to visualize, so let me give it to you in terms you can feel. If every drop of that ice melted, global sea levels would rise by roughly 58 meters. That is enough to submerge the Statue of Liberty up to her torch. That is enough to put the entire state of Florida permanently beneath the ocean. That is enough to erase the coastlines of every continent on the planet. Now, nobody is saying all of it melts tomorrow. But here's what the science is actually showing us, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. The Thwaites Glacier, that Florida-sized structure I mentioned, is already moving. It is retreating faster than any point in recorded observation. A 2021 study published in Nature Geoscience found that Thwaites could reach a tipping point of runaway collapse within the next 5 years under certain warming scenarios. Not centuries. Years. Once Thwaites goes, it destabilizes the glaciers behind it, which collectively hold enough water to raise global sea levels by over 3 meters. 3 meters drowns London's financial district. 3 meters permanently floods New Orleans. 3 meters makes Bangladesh one of the most densely populated nations on Earth, largely uninhabitable. And Thwaites is melting from the bottom, not from the air above, from the ocean water pushing underneath it. That detail matters because it means the threat is invisible from satellite imagery until it's already too late to reverse. By the time you can see the damage clearly from space, the system is already past the point of recovery. But let's go deeper, because the ice is just the beginning. Most people have no idea that underneath the Antarctic ice sheet, there is an entire hidden continent. Not metaphorically. Literally a continent with mountain ranges, river valleys, deep ocean floor level canyons, and active volcanoes, all buried under kilometers of ice that has been sitting on top of it for tens of millions of years. Scientists have mapped this hidden land using radar, seismic surveys, and satellite gravity measurements. The resulting dataset is called Bed Machine Antarctica, and what it shows is astonishing. The Gamburtsev Mountains in East Antarctica are almost entirely buried under the ice sheet. They rise to around 3,400 meters at their peaks, comparable to the European Alps, and almost no human being has ever seen them directly, because several kilometers of ice sit on top of them. They have been entombed since before modern humans existed. Before Homo sapiens evolved, these mountains have been dark and frozen for longer than our entire species has walked the Earth. Nearby, Denman Canyon cuts through the bedrock at more than 3,500 meters below sea level, making it the deepest land canyon on the planet. Deeper than any point in the Mariana Trench measured from the actual ocean surface. It sits under ice so thick and so heavy that the bedrock itself has been pushed down into the mantle by the weight pressing on it for millions of years. If you remove the ice, all of it, much of West Antarctica would be below sea level. Not just at the coast, in the interior. The weight of the ice has literally been holding the ground down, and without it, the land would slowly rebound upward over thousands of years. Geologists call this isostatic rebound, and it changes coastlines, river systems, and stress patterns deep within the crust as it happens. Now here is the part that sounds like science fiction but is completely verified by peer-reviewed research. Beneath the ice, there is a world of water, not rivers running to the ocean. Subglacial rivers flowing uphill in total darkness under pressure that would crush a submarine. Subglacial lakes that have been sealed from the surface for millions of years. Scientists have identified nearly 700 of these lakes using airborne radar surveys. Some of them connect to each other, draining and refilling in cycles that shift billions of liters of water across the continent over the course of weeks. When a subglacial lake drains, the ice above it responds. The surface drops by meters. Then it slowly lifts again as the next lake fills. This is happening right now, invisibly, beneath kilometers of ice, and the satellite data tracking it looks like a slow-motion breathing rhythm from a continent that should be dead. Lake Vostok is the most famous of these hidden lakes. It is 240 kilometers long, 50 kilometers wide, and sits under 4 kilometers of ice. It has been sealed from the surface for an estimated 15 million years. Its water is under such enormous pressure from the ice above that it exists in a state that has no real parallel anywhere else on Earth. When Russian scientists drilled into it in 2012, after more than 2 decades of drilling through the ice above, they found something: microbial life, DNA sequences that didn't match any known organism in any database. Life that had been evolving in complete isolation, without sunlight, without oxygen exchange with the atmosphere, for longer than the Himalayas have existed in their current form. This is not speculation. This is published science. And Lake Vostok is not unique. Lake Whillans, another subglacial lake, has been sampled more directly. Researchers found active microbial communities surviving by pulling chemical energy directly from the rock, a process called chemolithotrophy. No sunlight, no photosynthesis. Just rock and water and life finding a way to exist in conditions that, until Antarctica, we thought were biologically impossible. Amphipods, small shrimp-like crustaceans, were found beneath the Ross ice shelf, 750 meters below the ice surface, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest open ocean. They shouldn't be there by any model of Antarctic ecology we had before that discovery. They were just swimming around in the dark. Living, Antarctica is showing us that life doesn't need what we thought it needed. It doesn't need sunlight. It doesn't need warmth. It doesn't need a stable temperature or even a stable environment. This is exactly why space agencies are paying such close attention to what Antarctic researchers find. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, has a liquid ocean sealed beneath kilometers of ice. Enceladus, orbiting Saturn, shoots water vapor from cracks in its frozen shell. If life can exist in Lake Vostok, we have to seriously reconsider what we think we know about those worlds. Antarctica isn't finding aliens, but it is rewriting the definition of where life can exist. And that changes the entire equation of what we should be looking for in the solar system. Now let's talk about what nobody wants to admit is happening politically, because this is where the story shifts from fascinating to urgent. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959 by 12 nations and has since expanded to 54 signatories. It designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve, bans military activity, suspends all territorial claims, and, critically, prohibits any mineral extraction or resource exploitation. It is, by most measures, one of the most successful international agreements in history. But in 2048, the treaty's protocol on environmental protection, which contains the mining ban, becomes open for review. Any signatory nation can request that review. And if 50 of those nations agree, the mining ban can be lifted. That's 23 years from now. Geological surveys and extrapolations from the Antarctic's shared deep geology with South America, Africa, and Australia suggest the continent may contain significant deposits of coal, oil, natural gas, iron ore, copper, and critically rare earth elements. The materials that every electric vehicle battery, every smartphone, and every advanced military system currently depends on. Nobody has confirmed exact numbers because you can't run a commercial extraction survey under an active treaty prohibition. But what nations are doing is positioning. China has been building Antarctic infrastructure at a pace that has no scientific justification. It now operates 5 research stations and is constructing a 6th. It has developed heavy icebreaker capacity, logistics networks, and aerial surveillance systems specifically designed for Antarctic operations. It has conducted extensive mapping surveys of the continental shelf around Antarctica. Mapping that is not necessary for climate research, but is exactly what you would do if you were preparing for resource extraction and needed to establish presence before the treaty review. Russia has operated the longest continuous Antarctic program of any nation, has run seismic surveys in contested maritime zones around the continent, and has maintained infrastructure in areas that overlap with other nations' territorial claims. Claims that are currently frozen under the treaty but would become immediately relevant in a post-2048 environment. The United States Antarctic program, which has historically anchored the treaty's stability and scientific output, is operating with aging infrastructure at McMurdo Station, facing funding pressures, and has been losing ground in the logistical competition with China, specifically in terms of icebreaker capacity and year-round access capability. This is not a Cold War. It is a slow, quiet repositioning by nations that are thinking in decades while the public thinks in news cycles. And the irony is sharp. The very warming that is now destabilizing the ice is also making the resource extraction under it more accessible. As glaciers retreat and ice thins at the margins, areas that were logistically impossible to access become reachable. The same process that threatens coastal cities is also opening doors to the mineral wealth beneath the ice. That connection between climate change, geopolitical competition, and the hidden resources of a legally protected continent is the actual story of Antarctica right now. Not the penguins, not even the climate graphs. The combination of all of it, running simultaneously, pulling in different directions, with a hard legal deadline 23 years out. Here is what the ice cores tell us, and why it matters beyond the politics. Scientists drill down into the Antarctic ice sheet and pull up cylinders of frozen history. Each layer is a year. The air bubbles trapped inside are actual samples of Earth's ancient atmosphere, sealed in time with perfect fidelity. The oldest continuous ice core ever recovered contains atmosphere that is approximately 2 million years old. That core shows us carbon dioxide levels, methane concentrations, temperature records, and volcanic ash signatures going back further than the human species. What it shows us clearly, without ambiguity, is that current atmospheric CO2 levels are higher than at any point in the last 800,000 years of the record. Not close to previous highs. Definitively above them. The ice doesn't interpret. It doesn't have an agenda. It just records. That record is physically melting. Every degree of warming accelerates the loss of the archive that tells us what a stable Earth looks like. We are erasing the instruction manual while we're still trying to read it. The continent also feeds the Southern Ocean through subglacial outflows, iron-rich, nutrient-dense water that seeps out from beneath glaciers and drives massive phytoplankton blooms. Those blooms are the foundation of the Antarctic food web. They sustain krill. Krill sustain everything above them: fish, seabirds, seals, and whales. The blue whale, the largest animal that has ever existed on this planet, depends on a chain that begins with meltwater chemistry from under the ice. Change what flows out from beneath Antarctica, and the consequences move up through every layer of ocean life above it. Antarctica is not isolated. It is not a remote wilderness that functions independently from the rest of the world. It is a control system. It regulates ocean circulation, global weather patterns, sea levels, atmospheric composition, and the foundational biology of the world's largest ocean. It does all of that silently, from the bottom of the planet, and most of the people whose lives depend on it have never thought about it for a single minute. The ice is 5 kilometers thick in places. It contains mountain ranges nobody has seen. It holds lakes that have been sealed longer than our species has existed. It shelters life forms that are rewriting what we understand about biology. Its meltwater feeds the largest animals on Earth. Its bedrock holds resources that the most powerful nations on the planet are quietly preparing to compete over. And the legal window that has protected all of it for over 60 years closes for review in 2048. Antarctica is not empty. It is not simple. And it is not waiting for us to figure out what we want to do with it. The system underneath the ice is already responding to what we have done to the atmosphere above it. The Doomsday Glacier is already moving. The subglacial lakes are already shifting. The ancient air in those ice cores is already, layer by layer, melting back into an atmosphere it hasn't touched in a million years. The only question that remains is what we decide to do with the time we have before 2048 arrives. Because once that review opens, the continent that has been the world's last protected place becomes a negotiation. And negotiations about trillions of dollars in resources very rarely end the way the scientists hope they will.